All right, now in Zero Block 30, I'm privileged to have Rocky Sickmann, who is a legend in Marine Corps lore. I think that there's a lot of stories that's been told about him over the years, and he's one that we talk about quite often about how to handle adversity with grace, and being able to talk to you is an honor. Thank you, Rocky, for coming on the show.
No, it's my honor, chaps. Thank you, sir.
So I want to get kind of into a little bit of background, because you are a family man of family man. You come from one of those families that you had a bunch of brothers and sisters, you have a bunch of kids, and that must have impacted you in your journey along the way, and wanting to go home and see all of your family. Can you kind of talk a little bit about your upbringing and the military family that you come from, with your dad being a soldier as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Chaps, my father served in the Army. My brother served in the Army during Vietnam. And of course, my parents taught me three things: love of family, love of faith, and love of country. I went to a small grade school. I was so honored to raise that flag at the Catholic grade school, St. Gertrude's, and being able to stand out there and pledge to our allegiance. And I was just honored to do that. And my parents had me in parades holding the flag. And I wanted to serve our country. Plus, I knew that there was more outside this little town of Crockle that was a population of 50, and that was dogs and cats.
Wow.
And yeah, a very small town. So I joined the Marine Corps, and I told the recruiter, before I do this, I showed him a picture of an MSG, Marine Security Guard. I said, before I do that, I want to see the world. And it's 1976, chaps. And it was one of those things. There was no war. The Vietnam War just ended. And sure enough, I graduated in San Diego. I just so happened to be out in San Diego a couple of weeks ago. I spoke to the special training operation there in San Diego. But anyway, graduated, went to Asia for a year, came back. It was 3-4 there, went to 2-8, Camp Geiger, North Carolina, went on a med cruise. And I met this young girl, and I said, hey, before I get out of the Marine Corps, I want to do this one last gig, and that was MSG, Marine Security Guard. And so I graduated there. My first assignment was in Tehran. It was October 7th, 1979, and November 4th hit, and the rest is history. And
you kind of have a story that's sort of like mine. I remember reading a story about you where whenever you joined the Marine Corps, you didn't let your parents know beforehand. You had already kind of signed the contract and was like, this is what I'm doing, sitting down at dinner and having the normal dinner conversation. And your dad it didn't really register for him right away. Was I reading that the right way, where he was like, this didn't happen?
Right. You're absolutely right, chaps. And during that time, I had two brothers, one older, one younger, two older sisters, and my mom and dad. And my father was a concrete mixer driver. My mother was a carpet store secretary. And it was back in the days when my mother, she stayed up cooking while we were all being fed. And my father would go around the table and say, what did you do today? Rocky, what did you do? I said, I joined the Marine Corps. And he kind of like chuckled, and he goes, okay, so what did you really do? And I said, no, I really joined the Marine Corps. And he asked my mother, said, Tony, tell Rocky to tell us what he really did today. And so I said, no, Dad, I joined the Marine Corps. And he just looked at me. And I'll never forget him the morning, chaps, when I left for the boot camp. I've never seen my father cry. And I mean, my father cried. And my mother, God love her, she just said, you make sure you go to church, because someday you're going to need God. And so she was so right. And I understood why my father cried, but just for the next 13 weeks. And I was in a situation that little did I realize that they were preparing me for life, chaps. I mean, I never could understand why in boot camp back in 1976, they were teaching us how to clean our clothes with a bar stove, slab of concrete, and water. And little did I realize that those would be things that I would need during my 444 days of darkest days of my life.
And isn't that remarkable? The things that we don't even realize that we are getting trained for it. And I don't even think a lot of the drill instructors realize some of the methods behind it whenever they're even doing it. Like, for instance, I was just recently talking with a friend about how we in the Marine Corps will do rifle ranges differently than the other branch of services, where whenever we're performing on the rifle range, the Marines are down where the bullets are coming to, like the rounds are coming to us and we're pulling them down. but it's also you understand what it sounds like when you're getting shot at, because the difference of sound whenever the bullets are coming at you is drastically different than when you're on the firing line. It sounds different. So we know that and we're trained for that. You're like, that sound is familiar. Oh, the bullets are coming at me. So that's the reason why we do that. And
You know,
there's so many things that each Marine has that story. For instance, I told my mom I was thinking about joining the Air Force. Then I call her a couple hours later and say, well, I talked to the Marine recruiter and I'm actually going to do that. And she was upset as well.
it is when my parents found out that I was going to Iran. And Iran just started to get into the news in October. But going back to the training piece, the gas chamber. Remember having to go through the gas chamber?
Oh yeah.
I mean, I'll never forget that morning, November 4th, when the stuff was hitting the fan, and I was called downstairs. Billy was down in the basement. He heard them break in. I broke away from the front door where I was, and you're donning your gas mask. You don't even realize you're freaking doing it, chaps.
Right.
By the time you get out there, I can remember, and I mean, this is 42 years ago. I can still remember to this day how my gas mask was just going from clear to fog.
Mm-hmm.
The fog. And I can still hear the breathing of all that. But yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And the training, definitely the honor, commitment, sacrifice. I mean, God love you, you're a Purple Heart recipient. And so over 40 missions, and so there's a lot to be said for that. So I thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I want to get into your story, though. That's the reason why you're here, not about me. I want to talk a little bit about what was going on in Iran, because there's a lot of our listeners that really have no real idea about what's going on, even currently in Iran politically. But in 1979, when you were there, in January, their dictator had left. Like he was exiled and out of the country. And a lot of people don't realize that he needed to come to America to get some medical treatment. And that really set the political turmoil. There was a period of time when there was nearly 30,000 Americans that were in Iran. By the time that you got there in October of that year, it was down to less than 100, right?
Correct, about 65, yeah.
So you have less than 100 Americans that were there. And so you were captured whenever they actually came over the wall. You were captured in hopes that they would have the dictator returned back to Iran so he could face trial. Is that correct?
That is correct. And let me back up a little bit. It's interesting, as you know, President Carter was the president, and it's in the history book where President Carter, during one of the meetings, asked his staff, when the staff had told him, President Carter, we need to bring the Shah in. And President Carter said, what are you going to do if and when the Islamic Republic of Iran takes our people hostage? What are you going to say then when you want to bring the Shah in? Little did he realize that, sure enough, 2 weeks after he said that, and he approved because he had been asked to bring him in, that's exactly what happened. But that morning of November 4th, I'm happy to tell you, chaps, 7 Marines, because there was a total of about 12 Marines, but only 7 got into the Chancery. It was an 11 or 23-acre compound, and the Chancery was the most secured building, other than the Visa building, which was in the back of the embassy. And so we secured that building for 4 hours, waiting for the host government to come. And, which obviously it never did come. And 3 days after we were taken, the Ayatollah Khomeini basically approved the next 400 and some days of our life.
And before we really get into some of the treatment that you endured while you were there, speaking of President Carter, and when you were captured, and after you get back and you find out that President Carter essentially loses the presidential election because of what happened in Iran-Contra, like that's what most people would say. The public outcry for that was just outrageous, and he wasn't going to get reelected after what happened in Iran. When you were there, because typically when Marines are doing operations, we're kind of divorced a little bit from the presidency, from the political processes. You just have a job to do. When you were there and captured, were you bitter or angry towards the president, or expected him or wanted him to do more?
Yeah, and that's a great question. I can tell you that I was on the Med cruise in 1978 to 1979. I was in the Mediterranean in January of 1979 when the American Embassy was asked to close down. So we were on standby. I'll never forget it. We were on CH 53s, basically locked and loaded, ready to go in to assist if we needed. And obviously, we're turned down because they allowed X amount of 747s in to get them all out. I can tell you that when I was taken November 4th, chaps, I'm sitting there knowing that there's a fleet out in the Mediterranean. The Marines are going to be coming. I mean, I'm sitting there as I tied. We were tied to a chair for the next 30 days.
Mhm.
One was tied in a bed. I was tied in bed. It was a Air Force captain. He was at the foot of the bed. My wrists were tied to his ankles. My ankles were tied to his wrists. And that's how we sat there. And you're just sitting there thinking, what's going on? And I can tell you that I went through every emotion. I hated myself. I hated my government. I hated my stupidity for doing this. And then, of course, you sit there after a while and, it's got the good guy and the bad guy on your shoulder. But
Mhm.
it's like, no, it's not our government. It's these people. And I'm here to tell you, chaps, that the war on terrorism, it started November 4th, 1979, when the Islamic Republic of Iran attacked our American embassy. And they told us this for 445 days. It is not you that we hate. It's your government, but we will use you to humiliate your government. And it's not about Republican. It's not about Democrat. They hate all of our parties. They just hate our government because of what happened back in 1953, where we basically put the Shah into power. And they continue to teach that. And I'm a true believer, chaps. A Muslim is not born with hatred. They are taught hatred. And to this day, just a couple of days, November 4th was around. And what were they doing? They were burning the flag and basically chanting death to America. I mean, in the city, and young Iranians that have never met one are out there chanting death to America. And we wonder why people can wrap themselves with C4 and go up to a building and blow themselves up. Well, that's what they've been taught. They're going to do that.
Yeah, and we've seen and not just the extremism that arises from the Islamic religion, but also and multiple religions. It really is ingrained from you, from your parents, or how you get indoctrinated. And we've seen that in Sweden take place, and Norway take place, where radical right Christians will do the same type of thing. And I think that radicalizing religions across the globe is something that it's affected every single, I mean, from the Crusades on. It's been a
Right.
constant theme throughout human history that we've done that. And I want to go back a moment because whenever I got shot, I thought about it a ton about having hindsight bias or Monday morning quarterbacking everything. While you were captured in that first 30 days where you were tied to a chair and tied to a bed and tied to the other troops that were there with you, did you also play, I made a mistake here, I wish I'd have done this differently, and put yourself through that mental anguish as well?
Absolutely. Yeah. That morning, as a mission of a Marine security guard, chaps, is to provide protection to the property, the documents, and personnel of the inside the building. The outside perimeter is the host government property. I can tell, and I will tell every American until I'm in the ground, that the morning I was walking into the motor pool gate. Did you ever see the movie Argo, chaps?
Yes.
Yeah. The movie shows how they came over the gates. I'm here to tell you, I was walking into the motor pool gate just 30 yards away from that gate when my walkie talkie had recall. Right over top of my head was the camera pointing at the front gate, and I could see them coming over. And I'm sitting there thinking, we've been had. I run back to the chancery. Billy Gallegos is closing the door. We secure the steel door. Nobody's getting in, nobody's getting out. And we go back and don our big old flak jacket, about 50 pounds, and our snub nose 38 and our sawed off shotgun. That's what we had to protect the American embassy, waiting on the host government. And so about that time, is downstairs. They're banging on the front door. Plaster's coming from around the door. I radioed 3 other Marines come, 2 kneeling, 2 standing, because at this time we got the right to defend the American embassy.
Right.
All of a sudden in the basement, Billy hears that they've broken in. And I run down there. Again, I'm the closest to the step. I break away, run down, and I get down there. He points. And around the corner, who do they bring, chaps, but 4 Iranian women and black chadors. And they're using these women to basically push slowly forward, knowing that we would not shoot an innocent woman. We're being screamed, don't fire, don't retaliate, help is on the way. There was no help. Tear gas popped. They basically fled the building. We got up to the very top of the building, to the most secured part of the floor. And there, about a couple hours later, they start bringing people that did not make it in, chaps. They put a pistol to their head and said, if you don't open the doors. So at that time, State Department is on horn with President Carter. He says, hey, it's going to be 18 hours before we get. And so, so many things were learned because of what happened then. We now have reactionary forces. I mean, CENTCOM is created because of what happened in November 4th. So anyway, we were told to give ourselves up. But I can tell you, for the next 30 days, as I sat there, I wished I would have pulled the trigger. For the next 400 days, I wish I would have pulled the trigger. I can tell you that the last 42 years, chaps, I'm sitting there thinking, what would have happened had I pulled the trigger? If Billy and I pulled the trigger, shot those unarmed innocent, we would have been ridiculed as the Marines, going down as trigger happy people. But, you just wonder, war would have started then, but everything that Iran has done since then. After they released us, we paid $8.3 billion. They killed 240 Marines in Beirut. The IEDs that were used. I mean, the war with Iran and Iraq started when we were held hostage in the 80s. And Iran knew that they couldn't, beat Saddam Hussein. They knew that we could. And so we fought the war for them. So many things. And so I look back and I think, gosh, I wish I maybe would have pulled that trigger. So you're right. A lot of things went on.
And I think somebody with your perspective really puts the butterfly effect for November 4th of 1979, puts it so much more in perspective than the average citizen would. And I think that looking back at training and how things are done now, and when we look at situations like, there's movies like Rules of Engagement, and then there's also real life scenarios like what happened in Benghazi. The way that the embassies are guarded and armed now are totally different as well. Yeah. Did you have any conversations with either your fellow Marines that were the same rank as you, sergeant and below, or with higher leadership, that you felt that you were in a position where you could be outgunned when you only have snub-nosed pistols and sawed-off shotguns?
Oh, yeah. It was 2 weeks prior to November 4th that we got word that it was going to happen. And so we told them, hey, one of three things is going to happen. And sure enough, one of those things did happen. And it was President Carter was so right when he told his staff, hey, what are you going to say when those people take our people hostage? And so it's exactly what happened.
And can you walk us through, reading some of the stories, it put me right back in the position of talking with people whenever we were in firefights or just being out in conducting combat operations, where you really do go through memory by memory of certain events from your childhood. And one of those memories that you talk about that kind of passed the time for you mentally while you were tied to a chair is going through something that would be so mundane for the normal person. And that was just your mom cooking pancakes, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Those first 30 days, you were in a very dark place, and you just, you had to go somewhere in a happy place. So I elected to go back, and as far back as I could. And I can still remember touching the window of my room. We used to have a lot of snow back then. It doesn't seem like it snows that much, but I can remember the windows being frosty, but I could smell my mother's pancakes in the other room. And I got up, put my clothes on, walked in, and I looked through the little island divider from the hallway to the kitchen. And my mother used a skillet, a square little skillet, and she had poured 4 batters. And I can just remember those pancakes bubbling, and she turned them upside down, and she got a piece of butter and put a piece of butter on each one of those, and she put them onto a plate, and she took them over and put them on the table, and I opened up the syrup container and took a spoon, and I poured the maple syrup over top of it, and I ate them. And because the very first 30 days, you really, when you're in a situation of a traumatic situation, I mean, you don't know if you're going to live or die. I mean, not only those 30 days, but the next 400 days, you didn't really feel like eating. I mean, you wanted this to end, but in your head, you're eating her pies. Thanksgiving and Christmas, I ate her homemade bread, her turkey, her dressing. She made homemade ketchup. I mean, all those different things. You relived it in your past just to bring you back to a happy time. I can remember getting my first race car set. I thought that I wasn't going to get. My dad from around the corner pulls out this special surprise, and here's my race car set when I was a little kid, probably in fifth grade or so. But yeah, it's those memories. Like I said, love of family, love of faith, and love of country were the things that kept me alive.
And when you finally did get to come home after 440 days and you got to see your mom and dad again, were you able to, how soon after you got back, were you able to talk to them about your mental processes and how you went through things and how essentially something that I'm sure your mom didn't think anything about from your childhood of making you pancakes, how that
Well,
could have really saved your mental health?
yeah, it probably was stages when I came home, but
Mhm.
I remember telling my mom because there's a picture of me coming home, and I had a cut a yellow ribbon. They wrapped a whole yellow ribbon around the house, and I remember cutting it and trying to walk into the front door. Well, they had the door locked, so we had to walk around the back of the house. But I remember just getting in there, and my mom had already she had begged. Jeff, you have children?
I do. I have two kids.
So imagine how, and this is what I look at because I have three kids now, but what my poor parents went through. I mean, how do you, knowing that one of your loved ones, your children, are being taken hostage in a foreign country, how do you wake up every morning, get ready, and go to work and act like you're really going to work when you are sitting there thinking of them? I mean, my parents, they had the media live in their yard for 444 days. It was the biggest news around the world. And but my poor mother, what she would do is she would cook, she would bake just to keep herself going. That was her release of going through, and they wanted me home. My mother put her Christmas tree up in 1979, and she kept that Christmas tree up until 1981. When she would die, she would send my father Virgil out to the field to cut another tree because she just knew I was going to come home. God love her.
My gosh, man. Sorry that I just cannot imagine like putting it in the perspective of my own children and hearing stories that I mean, honestly, there's one that's going on now with the young gentleman, Austin Tice, or not a young gentleman that is captured and he's in Syria and being held hostage now. And he's been there for 6 years. I've been fortunate enough to interview several other prisoners of war as this show has gone on, where I've talked to Charlie Plum, who spent 6.5 years in the Hanoi Hilton. I've talked to a gentleman named Robert Sweat, who was shot down over Germany and was captured there. Dealing with something like that, because you know now that your mom was still bringing in the Christmas trees, that they were still keeping your memory alive. And I'm sure that you had no doubt about that while you were there. But one of the troubling parts to me, and it hit me emotionally when I was reading your story, was the idea that you were sitting in one of these chairs, that you were in a dark room, but you could hear the traffic going around you, and
Oh, yeah.
understanding that the economy of Iran was still going on, the world of Iran, the civilization was still happening. In your mind, you want to believe that everything is paused, but you didn't have that luxury because you could hear essentially another form of torture that the world was going on without you.
Absolutely. Yeah, those first 30 days. And I thought about the Vietnam veterans, chaps. I mean, when my brother came home during the Vietnam, the first thing he would do is race home, take his uniform off. People didn't really respect people
Mm.
who served their country. And, it was so sad. And so here I'm sitting there thinking, I'm 10,000 miles away from home. And nobody remembers the first 65 people that were killed in the Vietnam War. There were many that were killed. So who's going to care about 65 people 10,000 miles away from home? And like you said, you sat there through the broken windows. You could hear the city of Tehran start, and it would peak the traffic, the horns, and the demonstrations of death to America. And then all of a sudden it would die down, and there would be day one, day five, day 10. And you're sitting there thinking, you're going to rot here. And you were hoping, I mean, you were praying that, Thanksgiving, a humanitarian gesture. Nothing happened. Christmas. humanitarian gesture, nothing. And New Year's Eve, something's going to happen, nothing. And then you were put into a room where I spent the next 400 days in a room. I went outside probably a total of 7 times out of 444 days. And we were locked in that room. I mean, it was so eerie and was so hard to maintain a positive, respect, but you had to keep faith. And there was this one picture of this in my head, my girlfriend that I had just met right before. And so just like the movie Castaway, he had a locket. I didn't have a locket, but I had her picture. And she was my helping to drive through and hoping that I would someday get home and see her.
And you said that you hadn't been with her that long. And obviously 444 days is a long time with no contact. I mean, now we look at deployments, even from when I went, we didn't really have, you had Skype, but you couldn't hardly speak to anybody. Like the internet connection was terrible. You didn't have any talk at all. Did you also have to battle the demons of, she's going to move on eventually, and this person that's essentially keeping my sanity of who I want to go home and see and spend some personal time with whenever I get back? Is she feeling the same way? Were you going through that too?
Absolutely. Yeah. Especially when we hit the second Thanksgiving, the second Christmas, the second New Year's. I turned 23 in, excuse my language, in that shithole.
Yeah.
I mean, bad. And I'm sitting there thinking, this beautiful girl is going to be gone. But thank goodness she did wait. And we've been married 40 wonderful years. And I can tell you, Chap, she's the best thing. If it wasn't for Joe, I'd be in a ditch somewhere. She's just, she keeps me on track.
And I've heard you refer to her as your not only your spouse, but also your psychiatrist, your psychologist,
absolutely.
She's your everything. And I think looking back with how many kids you have and grandkids, you've seen them past the age that you were whenever you were captured. Does it ever blow your mind, hindsight bias, looking back at it and thinking, my kid is 23 years old. When I was 23, I was going through this, and then trying to imagine your kid in that scenario and knowing how young they are and how really unwise, because we ask our young military members to do so many things that now, as a father with a kid approaching 16 and a half, or that's 16 and a half, I think in 2 years, you could have been in Afghanistan, fight. How is that possible at that age? At 23, you were biting off a lot more than really mentally you were able to chew.
Oh yeah. It's every day. I mean, and like I said, even as I look back now, because I wasn't a parent, now I'm a parent, and I think of what my poor parents went through, and it breaks my heart. My poor mother and father went through, and I get very emotional. So excuse me, but it was, they passed away about 11 years ago, but I remember a picture of them when I left and a picture when I came back, Chaps, and they had changed so much, and which it would have aged me had I had to go through that. So right. You try to tell your kids, and one difficult time was when right after the rescue attempt, they moved us, and they always seemed to put me in the middle, handcuffed, blindfolded, and they put you in the back of this vehicle, handcuffed Jerry to the left, handcuffed Billy to the right. We're all handcuffed, blindfolded, and they put a blanket over top of us. So whenever we would drive somewhere, my kids would be, I hate sitting in this chair. I'd always tell them, hey, you'd be a bad hostage. You had to sit there. And so I'd explain.
That's so dirty to do to your kids. I mean, I do that too with mine whenever they complain about getting like a vaccine and be like, oh, you think that shot hurts? You should try an AK-47 round.
Absolutely. It's cruel, but you bring it back. And it's hard to explain what 444 days were. I mean, right. There's a different story every day. And, Billy, the guy I spent 400 days with, whenever I see him, he reminds me of things and I remind him of things. And so it's interesting.
So when you were getting to, you talk a lot about the first 30 days. When did you ever get to the point where you were almost broken, where you thought, this is where I'm going to spend the rest of my life? Like my life is going to end here.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, that first Thanksgiving, that first Christmas, that first New Year's Eve, and then of course we were allowed to be into a room with two other people. During our interrogations, one of the Americans broke during an interrogation and put seven State Department people and military people in solitary confinement. Thank goodness I was in a room with two other people, which helped, pass the time. But it was that second Thanksgiving, that second Christmas, when we weren't going home, that you really just, man, you just did not see the light at the end of the tunnel. And it got to be the point where you would walk out, and when they would allow you, and you first knock on the door, you knock on the door, put a piece of paper underneath the door, and then if you knock correctly, they would take you to the restroom. If you didn't knock correctly and you knocked too loud, they tell you have to wait, and so you have to do it in a can. And so they would come, blindfold us, take us to the restroom, and the ones that really were the cruel ones, they'd drop you or make you fall over a table or a chair, and they would laugh. And that's why I said, on November 4th, 1979, Americans were humiliated and just, in a situation that was so disgusting. And so you would come back from the restroom and they would push you into the room. And as they push you into the room, you'd take your blindfold off and push the door back open. The guard that took us to the restroom would never be armed. It was the people out in the hallway. And you would push the door open and walk out, and all these guys would come with their weapon. And you would take the weapon and put it in your mouth and say, you know what, pull the trigger. I don't care. And it was sad, but you got to that point, chaps, that you just couldn't do this anymore. And that's why I think they had to lock us in a room for 400 days. I mean, lock us in there just like a freaking animal. And I tell my wife, I hate going to zoos at times because I myself as that animal in the zoo at times. And so, but yeah, that was probably one of the darkest and most humiliating and tough times to go through.
And that makes me think of a story that I recently read, that there is a think tank out of Washington where one of the gentlemen who runs that was talking about looking at the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and thinking about some of the mistakes that we made as a society and how we view service members and things like that. And one of the big mistakes that he thinks that we made was there was a huge impetus put on reunion videos. When you were coming back from a deployment, that you were going to show the husband and wives hugging each other, whoever was returning, that you would have these moments, and everyone gets emotional. And we've all seen those mantra, or the dogs, and you go home and your dog's going crazy to see you. But we don't often show the Gold Star mother that has to meet her son or daughter in Dover coming off the plane draped in an American flag casket.
Yeah.
We don't show those things too often. We also see whenever prisoners of war reunited with their families that there's a happy moment, and obviously and rightfully so, that you're finally reunited. But we don't see those moments of how you begin to recover your life, because I imagine that it's not just leaving a room after spending 400 plus days in there and then everything is totally fine. When you got back off the plane and you were reunited with your now wife, how hard was it for you in a time period where we didn't put a lot of focus on mental health or counseling and things like that? How did you end up becoming the man that you are now? And every time I've heard an interview with you or read an interview with you, you're so gracious and so kind and so humble. How did you get rid of that bitterness and fear and anxiety, or did you?
No, I don't think this is my story. And like I said, after finally being released, you have to understand it's January 20th, 1981. We're blindfolded as they take us to the airport. They unblindfold us at the airport. They push us onto an airplane. They start closing the door, and you start looking around and saying, well, wait, where's Chaps? Where's Gene? Where's Kurt? Where's Debbie? Where's Judy? Where's everybody else? And they said, no, you're the last. We said, what are you talking about? There's not 65 people here. And they go, no, the others were a year earlier. We didn't know that we were the last of the 52 Americans remaining there because you couldn't leave them there. And so at that point in time, chaps, and then you start hearing stories of 8 people, and you talk about the fallen, the Gold Star families. We didn't know, I didn't know that 8 people lost their life. We'd heard that there was a rescue, but we didn't really know what happened. And so I can tell you, I think of that. But when I came home, being in a quiet environment, I can't stand that. I got to have noise. I got to have, noise going on. Every morning, I take a shower. You know why, chaps? I can't.
Yeah.
The first freaking 2 months, you had to take a bird bath. I mean, and sometimes I even take 2 showers a day because I can't. I walk outside and just sit there and look at the sky because I can. I can go up and get a cup with ice because I can. So all these things, it's one of those things I can tell you every morning I wake up. I think of those 8 individuals that paid the ultimate sacrifice, their life for my life, and never again. And this is where, working for Folds of Honor provides scholarships, chaps, to families of fallen and disabled military. And when I came home, I was able to marry my wonderful bride. We have 3 wonderful children. Those guys lost all that on the morning of April 25th. Never again would they be able to go fishing with their son, kick a ball with their daughter, play lacrosse with their other daughter, walk them down the aisle in a wedding, hold their grandkids. I've done all those things. And so it's a heavy freaking burden. And so you don't ever lose that. And I am very upset that our government continues to try to negotiate with Iran when Iran is so wrong. But Iran, you got to give them credit. They know that our government changes every 4 to 8 years. They just got to negotiate through, and then we'll change new administration, new people, and then people will have to start over. And we forget their radical belief has gone on for 42 years. It's the people that took us are in the administration in Iran. So it hurts. And so you never forget it. I hate to say it. And that's where my good wife, she's my psychiatrist, and she says, Rock, this is what you need to do, because she knew me before and she knew me after.
And being able to have that sense of really support system is something that is invaluable. I have it as well. And we constantly encourage people to have that support system, because without it, people that go through horrific events wouldn't be the same. I sat down with Woody Williams, who is the last living Marine Medal of Honor recipient from World War II, and he operated a flamethrower on Iwo Jima. And I asked him kind of the same line of questioning, where we talked about what he dealt with mentally, and he said that he felt like for all the thousands that died on Iwo Jima, that he felt that he owed them to live life in a way that honored them every single day. That freedom is something that we cannot take for granted, and the sacrifices that pays the check for that freedom is something that we can't look past. Do you ever have a sense of, I don't want to say survivor's guilt, but really survivor's guilt, where you look back and you think, why did I make it and some of the other people didn't?
No, absolutely. I think of that every day when I feel like I'm having a bad day, and the man upstairs, my faith has really taken me and helped me through that by many different things. But I can tell you, not too long ago, I worked 34 years after I got out. And I can remember a psychiatrist talked to all the Marines when we came home. And the psychiatrist told us there's going to be 2 ways that you're going to deal with this. One way, you're going to keep it inside and never talk about it, but something's going to cause you to break. Or the other side is going to be a way that you use it to talk about and make it through life. And so, and I think that's the direction I have been going and using as a stepping stone. Because not too long ago, I had to catch a 6:30 flight in the morning, and I'm running through the house, going crazy. I go to a convenience store. I get a banana, breakfast bar, and water. I go to pay. I owe $4.44. And I look at that number and I see, God, you're right. I would rather be catching a 6:30 flight any morning than being held hostage. I mean, my worst time was when they put us up against the wall and put, rifles to the back of our head and thought you were a dead guy. So if I can make it through that, chaps, I can make it through anything. And so, but yeah, for me, for Folds of Honor, it's the therapeutic piece for me to give me a driving forced to continue on. Where many of my buddies, when they came home, committed suicide. I mean, it's one of those things that's keeping me busy, and it relates back thinking of what my poor parents went through, but what the 1% of our population that serves in the military right now, and they have families. And so I think of them as if it was my parents, that what they're going through this holiday season. Every holiday season, I toast a drink to all of our military, as I'm going to toast this Veterans Day to all of them that serve, because we wouldn't be living in this great society if it wasn't for them protecting what we currently have.
No doubt about it. And the last thing that I want to ask you is this concept of being a lifelong Marine. And it's something that General Neller had really spoken to me about when I met him at a NASCAR race. And I had a lot of regrets for the way that I got out of the Marine Corps and how I wanted to continue on my career and make a positive impact with junior Marines that were coming up. You are living that as being a lifelong Marine and trying to improve the lives of those around you and understanding the sacrifices that you've already made for the country. When you look at the idea of being a lifelong Marine, what is something that you feel like you are almost have a calling to do for this community?
You know, that's a great question. I can tell you, I have been blessed. Um, the Marine Corps has kept me in the loops. I have spoken to Marine embassies. My son and I went to Cairo, Egypt 3 years ago, spoke to the embassy there. Then in 2020, during COVID, I spoke to the Far East, the Caribbean, American embassies via Zoom. Last week, it was last week, I was in San Diego at the Special Training Operation Command. I then went to MSG on Thursday to speak to the Marines. And I mean, I'm all over the place, but you know what? I want to make sure that every American hears the story of those 8 individuals that had the guts to try. I want to use another word, but I can't do that. You got to be correct, but the guts to try to come over to rescue us. And, you know, for you to think that nothing's going to happen, I never thought anything was going to ever happen to me. Standing post in an American embassy in Tehran, but it did. And, you know, it's a standing thing that it's never going to go away. And so, shame on me if I don't get up and work hard to do what those 80, 90 some guys did that flew throughout the night to try to come in. They made it into Desert One to attempt to come over. I need to make sure I attempt every day, every morning, every noon, every night to make sure that everybody knows. As you said earlier, freedom is not free. And we need to make sure that we thank those that protect our freedom each and every day.
And I think one of the best organizations that's doing that is Folds of Honor, and the way that you're looking out for the people who need it most, the people that have the family members of those who lost their lives or those who have been severely injured along the way. So I want to thank you not only for your service to the country and the Marine Corps, but what you're doing as an example afterwards and being able to really follow the Marine Corps mantra of improvise, adapting, and overcoming. And that is, it's something that we can spit out, but something that you have embodied over the last 40 years. Rocky, thank you so much for joining us.
No, thank you. And again, Semper Fi, and thank you for serving our country also, Jeff.
Semper Fi.